March 3rd, 2024, a control room at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena. For nearly 4 months, every signal coming back from Voyager 1 had been the same kind of nothing. A steady radio carrier wave, present, alive, arriving right on schedule, but carrying no usable information at all, just a stream of ones and zeros that resolved into static garbage no matter how the team decoded it. Then on that afternoon, an engineer working with NASA's Deep Space Network noticed something in the data that did not belong. One section of the signal had stopped matching the noise around it. It looked structured. It looked like it was trying to say something. And for a spacecraft that had been sending gibberish since November of the previous year, from a machine 15 billion miles away that nobody could walk up to and inspect, that was the moment everything changed. Let's be honest about what that moment actually was, because the phrase "something responded" can mean a lot of things, and only one of those things is true. Nothing alien reached out and touched Voyager 1. No outside intelligence sent it a message. What happened was stranger in a quieter way. Engineers on Earth had sent a deliberate command into the dark, not expecting a clean answer, more or less knocking on a door they assumed was broken. And something on the spacecraft itself answered back in a format nobody had used before. The mystery wasn't who responded. The mystery was what exactly, inside a computer built in the 1970s, was still capable of answering it all, and what it was trying to tell them. To understand why that single fragment of signal mattered so much, you have to go back further than March 2024. Back past November 2023, back to a spacecraft that was never supposed to still be talking to anyone. Voyager 1 launched on September 5th, 1977 from Cape Canaveral, 16 days after its twin, Voyager 2. Both were built for a 5-year tour of Jupiter and Saturn. Voyager 1 used Saturn's gravity to slingshot itself up and out of the plane of the solar system, trading any future encounters with Uranus or Neptune for a faster, steeper trajectory toward interstellar space. It carried instruments to measure magnetic fields, plasma, cosmic rays, and it carried something else, too. The Golden Record, a gold-plated copper disc holding greetings in 55 languages, music from across human cultures, and a map showing where Earth sits relative to a set of pulsars, in case anything out there ever finds it and wants to know where to look. In February 1998, Voyager 1 passed Pioneer 10 to become the most distant human-made object in existence, a title it still holds. In August 2012, instruments on board detected a sharp change in the particles around the spacecraft, and NASA confirmed that Voyager 1 had crossed the heliopause, the boundary where the sun's influence gives way to the true medium between stars. It became the first spacecraft in history to reach interstellar space, and it has kept transmitting from out there ever since. None of that history was supposed to still be relevant in 2024. The mission was designed to last 5 years. By the time the FDS anomaly hit, it had been running for almost 47. It had already survived at least one close call by then. In 2017, engineers noticed that the primary thrusters Voyager 1 used to keep its antenna aimed at Earth were degrading, needing longer and longer pulses to achieve the same tiny nudge in orientation. According to a NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory update on the fix, the team switched Voyager 1 over to a backup set of thrusters, ones that had last fired during the spacecraft's planetary flybys back in the early 1980s. Those thrusters had sat unused for 37 years. They worked anyway. That single decision, made by engineers reading 40-year-old design documents, is a big part of why Voyager 1 was still capable of pointing its antenna at Earth well enough, 7 years later, to have any FDS crisis to solve at all. This wasn't even the spacecraft's first strange episode. In May 2022, JPL reported that Voyager 1's attitude articulation and control system, the AACS, which keeps its antenna pointed at Earth, had started returning telemetry that didn't match its actual behavior. The antenna was still pointed correctly, commands were still getting through, but the health data coming back described a spacecraft that, on paper, shouldn't have been able to function the way it clearly was. Suzanne Dodd, Voyager's project manager at JPL, said at the time that the team might never find the root cause and would simply have to adapt to it if they couldn't. That problem eventually resolved itself, more or less, through patient troubleshooting, rather than a clean fix. And when the AACS trouble first flared, JPL brought a retired engineer named Bob Rasmussen back in specifically to think it through, a man who had joined the Voyager systems engineering team in 1975, 2 years before either spacecraft left Earth. He'd been retired for a little over a year. He came back anyway because, as he put it, he liked solving puzzles, and this was one he couldn't pass up. That's worth sitting with for a second. In 2022, the team that keeps Voyager 1 alive had to pull a nearly 50-year veteran of the program out of retirement because the people who understood this specific ancient hardware well enough to fix it were running out. That fact becomes important again in a minute, and the ACS scare wasn't even the closest this program came to losing a spacecraft entirely. That happened to Voyager 1's twin the following year. On July 21st, 2023, a routine set of commands sent to Voyager 2 accidentally tilted its antenna 2 degrees off its lock on Earth. 2 degrees sounds like nothing. At more than 12, 3 billion miles, it was enough to sever the link completely. Voyager 2 could no longer receive commands, and its data stopped arriving. CNN reported that JPL's Deep Space Network, the global system of giant dish antennas in California, Spain, and Australia that talks to every deep space mission NASA flies, spent days scanning for even a faint carrier signal, the spacecraft's electronic heartbeat, just to confirm it was still alive. The spacecraft's own fault protection software carried a built-in safeguard. If contact wasn't restored, Voyager 2 was programmed to automatically reset its orientation and repoint itself at Earth, but not until October, months away. Engineers didn't want to wait that long. On August 4th, the Deep Space Network's largest dish in Canberra, Australia, sent what the mission team nicknamed an interstellar shout, a command broadcast at maximum power, gambling that it could still reach an antenna pointed slightly the wrong way. It worked. A response came back roughly 37 hours later, and Voyager 2 was talking again. The lesson from that near miss wasn't about intelligence signals or mysterious messages. It was about how thin the margin really is. A 2-degree mistake, an ordinary human error in a routine command, came close to permanently ending contact with one of only 2 spacecraft ever built that can measure interstellar space directly. And the fix that saved it was, in the end, just a louder version of a normal instruction sent with no guarantee it would land. If you want to know why NASA keeps fighting for 2 spacecraft that are older than most of the engineers working on them, here's the number that should stop you. Voyager 2, still fully operational, is the only spacecraft in history to have flown past all 4 giant planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. No mission before or since has repeated that. Nothing currently planned will repeat it for decades, if ever. These 2 machines are not nostalgia projects. They are the only working instruments humanity has ever had, or will have for a long time, sitting outside the bubble the sun carves out of interstellar space. Losing either one permanently means losing a vantage point nobody alive today would live to see rebuilt. So when Voyager 1 went quiet, not silent, but unreadable, on November 14th, 2023, that was the stakes. The radio carrier signal kept arriving on schedule. Mission controllers could tell the spacecraft was receiving their commands and functioning in some basic sense, but the actual science and engineering data, the numbers that told the team whether the spacecraft was healthy, whether its power systems were stable, whether its instruments were still gathering anything useful, had turned into noise. Weeks passed, then a month, then several. NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, in an official update posted to its mission blog, explained that engineers had traced the likely source to one of Voyager 1's 3 onboard computers, the Flight Data Subsystem, or FDS, which is responsible for packaging science and engineering data before it's handed off to the radio transmitter. Something inside that system had broken. They just didn't know what, or how badly, or whether it could be fixed at all from 15 billion miles away. Here's the open question. The whole story turns on, and it's worth asking it directly instead of burying it. How do you diagnose a computer you cannot see, cannot touch, and cannot even talk to in real time, when a single round-trip conversation with it takes the better part of 2 days? Every command has to travel through the Deep Space Network, 3 clusters of giant radio dishes spaced roughly equally around the planet, in California, near Madrid in Spain, and near Canberra in Australia, positioned so that as Earth rotates, at least one of them always has Voyager 1 in view. Even with that constant coverage, there is no shortcut around the physics. Light itself, the fastest thing there is, still takes hours to cross the distance involved, so every guess the team made had to be a good one, because a wrong command sent into that silence wouldn't just fail quietly. It could make things worse in ways nobody would find out about for days. The team tried the obvious things first. They power-cycled instruments, turning things off and back on to see if the FDS would snap back into a recognizable state. Nothing changed. According to a detailed account carried by IEE Spectrum, project scientist Linda Spilker explained that when the simple approach failed, the team escalated to something more aggressive. They commanded Voyager 1 to perform a full memory readout, essentially asking the spacecraft to dump the entire contents of the FDS computer's memory back to Earth, byte by byte, so engineers could inspect it directly rather than guessing from the outside. That's when they found it. A single chip inside the FDS, storing a 256-bit chunk of memory that included part of the software code the computer needed to function, had stopped working. In her words, describing the failure to IEE Spectrum, engineers found a bit that was stuck, permanently fixed at the same binary value, unable to change no matter what command told it to. That's the failure. But finding it wasn't the same as fixing it, and this is where the March 3rd moment comes back into the story. Because it wasn't actually the discovery of the failed chip. It came before that. On March 1st, 2024, the team sent what engineers informally call a poke, a command meant to nudge the FDS into running a different sequence of internal software, essentially trying different keys in a lock to see which one might turn. 2 days later, on March 3rd, That fragment of unusual signal showed up, the piece that didn't match the surrounding noise. An engineer with NASA's Deep Space Network, the network of giant radio dishes that talks to every deep space mission NASA flies, managed to decode it. And inside that decoded fragment was a readout, a partial map of the FDS memory. It wasn't a clean fix. It wasn't even data anyone could immediately act on. But it was a direction, the first genuinely new information the team had gotten in nearly 4 months, and it pointed straight at the chip that had gone bad. If you're finding this as strange and quietly thrilling as I do, that a 50-year-old computer chip 47 years into a 5-year mission could still, when poked correctly, cough up a clue from 15 billion miles away, this is a good moment to hit subscribe, because stories like this one, real engineering built on real risk with a real chance of failure, are exactly what this channel is built around, and there's more of it coming. Now the team had a target, and a much harder problem sitting right behind it. According to Scientific American's coverage of the episode, Suzanne Dodd described the situation bluntly at the time, calling it the most serious issue she'd faced since becoming Voyager's project manager, and saying plainly that it was scary, because you lose communication with the spacecraft. That's not dramatic license from a script. That's the person actually responsible for the mission on the record, describing genuine fear about losing one of only 2 working windows into interstellar space. The chip itself could not be repaired. There was no way to send a replacement part across 15 billion miles, no way to reach in and swap it out. Whatever code had lived on that failed chip needed a new home somewhere else. Inside the FDS's remaining working memory, or Voyager 1, would stay unreadable indefinitely, transmitting a perfect signal that meant nothing. That should have been simple in theory, and it very much was not in practice. The chunk of affected code was 256 bits. No single free location inside the FDS memory was large enough to hold all of it in one piece. So the team came up with a workaround described in a NASA JPL mission update. They would split the code apart, dividing it into smaller sections, and store those sections in different locations scattered across the computer's remaining memory. Every reference inside the FDS software that pointed to the old location of that code had to be found and updated to point to the new, scattered locations instead, or the system would break in some new way the moment it tried to run. And they had to do all of this using a programming language and a computer architecture from the 1970s, largely from memory and old documentation, because very few people alive still work with hardware like this professionally. According to a Space.com report on the fix, the team finished preparing that plan and sent the command to relocate the first piece of affected code, the section responsible for engineering data, the health telemetry that would tell them whether the rest of the spacecraft was even stable on April 18th, 2024. Because Voyager 1 was roughly 22.5 hours of one-way travel time from Earth at that point, the command didn't arrive until the next day. Confirmation that it had worked took even longer. And here's the turning point the whole story was building toward. On April 20th, 2024, Voyager 1 sent back engineering data that actually made sense, readable telemetry describing the spacecraft's real health for the first time in 5 months. CNN reported that Linda Spilker, in a statement issued that Saturday, said simply, "Today was a great day for Voyager 1. We're back in communication with the spacecraft, and we look forward to getting science data back." According to NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, the team that had spent months chasing a ghost inside a computer, older than most of them, gathered in a conference room to watch the readout come in, and by the accounts from that day, there was applause. That wasn't the end of the fix, only the first piece of it. Engineering data was one section of code. The science data, the actual measurements from Voyager 1's remaining instruments, the readings that make the whole mission scientifically worth running, still needed its own relocated section of code, its own confirmation, its own multi-day wait for a command to cross the gap and a reply to cross it back. NASA continued that process through the following weeks, moving each remaining piece of affected code into its scattered new locations one at a time, verifying each step before risking the next. Because a single mistake sent into a computer you can't physically reach could end the conversation permanently. Here's the part of this story that a lot of coverage skipped over, and it matters. Because a real scientific account includes the parts that are still unresolved. NASA has never said with certainty why that chip failed in the first place. The leading explanation, reported across multiple sources including NASA's own updates, is some combination of accumulated radiation damage from decades spent outside the protective bubble of the heliosphere, or simply the ordinary wear of electronics that were never designed to run for half a century, or some mixture of both that can't be fully separated from the outside. There is no confirmed single cause. Engineers were honest about that ambiguity, rather than papering over it with a tidy explanation, and that honesty is itself part of why this counts as real science rather than a manufactured crisis. Nobody involved claimed to know more than they actually did. By the time the fix was finished, Voyager 1 was, once again, doing something it was never built to keep doing this long, and the team knew this wouldn't be the last time something broke. It's a mission running almost a decade past even its most optimistic extended timeline, powered by a radioisotope generator that loses a small, predictable amount of output every single year, with no way to refuel it and no way to send a repair crew. Every fix like the FDS relocation buys time. None of them buy it back permanently. Here's what that predictable decline actually looks like in numbers, because it explains almost everything about how this mission is being run today. Voyager 1 carries 3 radioisotope thermoelectric generators, devices that turn the heat from decaying plutonium-238 into electricity, since sunlight is far too weak this far from the sun for solar panels to work. At launch in 1977, according to NASA's own mission FAQ, those generators produced about 470 watts combined. Today, that figure sits at roughly 230 watts, less than half, because the generators lose approximately 4 watts of output every single year, a slow, physics-driven decline that nothing can stop or reverse. Voyager 1's radio transmitter itself runs on only about 20 watts, less power than a refrigerator light bulb, and that faint signal is still what reaches Earth across 15 billion miles. There's no way to recharge the system, and no way to send a maintenance mission. Every watt that disappears has to be taken from somewhere, which is exactly why engineers have spent the last several years switching off instruments one at a time, starting with the ones least critical to the core interstellar science. In a running effort, NASA has internally nicknamed the Big Bang Project, aimed at squeezing every remaining year of operation out of a shrinking power budget. That budget got tighter than expected just months ago. During a routine maneuver in late February 2026, Voyager 1's power levels dropped further than engineers anticipated, coming close enough to a critical threshold that the spacecraft's automatic fault protection system nearly triggered on its own, a self-preservation shutdown that would have forced the team into another long, uncertain recovery, not unlike the one they'd already fought through in 2024. Engineers intervened before that happened. It's one more reminder that nothing about keeping this spacecraft alive has become routine, even 50 years in. That brings the story to what's happening right now in 2026, because the FDS crisis wasn't a one-time scare followed by a return to normal. It set the tone for how this mission is being managed for whatever time it has left. On April 17, 2026, engineers at JPL sent a command to switch off another instrument entirely, the low-energy charged particles experiment known as LECP, which had been running almost continuously since 1977, measuring the ions, electrons, and cosmic rays that make up the interstellar medium Voyager 1 is now flying through. It was one of the last instruments still returning genuinely unique science, because Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 remain the only spacecraft ever built that are far enough from Earth to take those specific readings at all. NASA didn't turn it off because it broke. They turned it off because the spacecraft's dwindling power supply couldn't keep everything running, and something had to be sacrificed to keep the rest of the mission alive a little longer. LECP was the 8th of Voyager 1's original 10 science instruments to be powered down since launch, leaving only the magnetometer and the plasma wave subsystem still switched on, the 2 instruments the team judged most essential to understanding the interstellar medium the spacecraft is now flying through. According to a NASA science update on the decision, engineers are testing whether a new approach to conserving power, tried first on the lower-risk twin, Voyager 2, could eventually allow LECP to be switched back on later, though nothing about that is guaranteed, and current projections cited in that update suggest the mission, in its present form, may not be able to continue much past the end of this decade, unless the power-saving plan buys it more time than expected. And in November of this year, Voyager 1 is set to cross a distance no human-made object has ever reached before. NASA lists the moment as November 18th, 2026 at 2:16:07 A. Hemisphere Pacific time, the instant the spacecraft becomes exactly 1 light day from Earth, more than 16 billion miles out. Susie Dodd, still the mission's project manager, described what that distance actually does to communication in terms anyone can picture. If she sends a command and says, "Good morning, Voyager 1," at 8 in the morning on a Monday, the reply doesn't come back until roughly 8 in the morning on Wednesday. Every single exchange with this spacecraft now takes 2 full days from question to answer, and that gap only grows permanently as Voyager 1 adds roughly another 500 million kilometers of distance every year, climbing outward at close to 61,000 kilometers an hour toward a point in the constellation Ophiuchus that it will never actually reach in any meaningful sense, because by the time it would arrive, there won't be enough power left on board to prove it got there at all. If you're still with me at this point, here's the second thing worth pausing on before we close this out. This channel exists because stories like this one, real institutions, real named engineers, real multi-year problems with genuinely uncertain outcomes, are more interesting than anything invented. And if that's the kind of thing you want to keep finding in your feed, this is the moment to subscribe, right before we get to why any of this actually matters. Because here's the reframe worth sitting with. The headline promise was that something responded to Voyager 1, that something wasn't supposed to happen. And it's true, in the most literal, unglamorous, and honestly more impressive sense than any fictional version of that headline could be. In March of 2024, a team of engineers spoke to a computer built during the Ford administration, a machine whose remaining chips are older than the internet, whose programming language few universities still teach, whose original architects are mostly retired or gone. And that computer, after 4 months of total silence, answered back in a format nobody had used in decades. Not because anything intelligent reached out from beyond the solar system, because a group of people on Earth refused to accept that the conversation was over, kept sending careful, patient signals across a gap that takes the better part of 2 days to cross in either direction, and eventually got something back. Jet Propulsion Laboratory, the NASA center that has operated both Voyager spacecraft since launch, is itself managed by the California Institute of Technology, Caltech, under contract to NASA, which means this entire 50-year relay of engineers, from the original team that built the FDS in the 1970s to the retirees pulled back in during 2022 to the people who wrote and sent that relocation command in April 2024, has run through a single institutional lineage the whole time. One university's engineering culture passed down across 5 decades of graduate students, postdocs, and lifers who never quite left. That continuity is not an accident. It's the only reason a spacecraft this old can still be fixed at all, because the people fixing it, or their direct professional descendants, are the same people, or trained by the same people who built it. Voyager. Voyager 1 is not going to stop being fragile. Some year, likely within the next decade, its power will drop below the threshold needed to run even its most essential systems, and the messages will stop for good, not because anything failed dramatically, but because there simply won't be enough electricity left to send a signal 15, 16, eventually 20 billion miles home. When that happens, the golden record keeps traveling anyway, carrying a sound recording of a heartbeat, a whale call, Chuck Berry, greetings in 55 human languages, and a map to a planet that, by the time anyone finds it, may look nothing like it does today. The spacecraft becomes a message with no sender left to answer follow-up questions, drifting toward a point in the constellation Ophiuchus that it will reach in roughly 40,000 years, long after every engineer who ever spoke to it is gone, and long after the institutions that built it have changed beyond recognition or ceased to exist at all. But it hasn't happened yet. Right now, as this video goes up, Voyager 1 is still out there, still receiving commands, still occasionally answering, still adding distance every single day, closing in on a light day from home in a matter of months. Every time engineers send it a new instruction and wait 2 full days to find out if it worked, they're running the same bet the 2024 team ran with that poke command in March, betting that something ancient and fragile still has one more answer left in it. So far, every single time it has. If you want to be here the next time that changes, the next time engineers have to reach across billions of miles and gamble on a machine built before most of us were born, subscribe now, because when it happens, this is where you'll hear it first. And this wasn't supposed to happen, but somehow, 49 years in, it keeps happening anyway.